Hi, my name is Chris Kapuist, and I'm an occupational epidemiologist at the Center for Fire, Rescue, and EMS Health Research at NDRI USA. Today, I'm here to talk to you about health disparities among sexual and minority women firefighters. So to start, are there firefighters who identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual? The answer is yes, of course, but they may not be out in the workplace. From research done in the general population, we know about half of the people that identify as sexual minorities are closeted in the workforce. So I decided, let me see what's going on with the sexual minority health and safety of firefighters. Has any work been done? So naturally, as a scientist, I went ahead to PubMed and to Google Scholar and put in search terms for gay firefighter, bisexual firefighter, lesbian firefighter, queer firefighter, etc. And I was kind of shocked. Some of the results came up with nothing, and some only came up with one article or one or two relevant articles. So really little is known about the health and safety of firefighters who identify as sexual minorities. So next, I decided, as anyone else would do, to just go ahead and Google and see what's going on with LGBTQ plus firefighters in the media and online. And first, let me talk about some of the not so great things. So a firefighter in Rhode Island was on scene and some members of her crew shouted a gay slur at her and flung an injured person's blood and brain matter at her. And she won a discrimination lawsuit against them. There's a couple in Canada whose department did not like them referring to each other at work as wives and were forced out. There's a Virginia firefighter who, once his superior found out that he was gay, he claims they forced him out, and they settled that outside of court where he was awarded money. And lastly, I think we're all aware of the incident of hazing at FDNY, where the firefighters in the station put their genitals on the probationary firefighters' faces. And what isn't discussed a lot about that is right before they did that, they said, "This house is really gay." Now, for some of the kind of progressive things, good things going on. First, visibility is important, and there are multiple firefighters who are out and open in their department and even working as liaisons, not only for other LGBTQ people in the fire service, but also for the general community that they serve. As well, it's nice to see in some of the fire service trade journals that there are articles addressing life as a lesbian or gay firefighter or bisexual firefighter. As well, there's been some media on different members of the LGBTQ community breaking barriers and progressing in their career, as this FDNY woman who identifies as gay is the first 4-star chief. And lastly, the IFF has partnered with Pride at Work, which is a union specifically for protecting sexual minority workers in the US. So after seeing there's really no research done, and in the media there are some good things, but a lot of the stuff kind of points to a poor work environment for sexual minority firefighters. So I decided to investigate whether there are health disparities among lesbian and bisexual women firefighters from a study that the center conducted. I will be using baseline data from the study, which took place in 2018. And first, I want to know, of this convenience sample, which is a national sample, anybody could take this survey, what percent of the respondents identified as lesbian and bisexual? And then were there health disparities among lesbian bisexual firefighters compared to heterosexual women firefighters? And more specifically, were there disparities in mental health, behavioral health, physical health, or occupational safety? So first, among the over 3,000 women firefighters who responded to this survey, 10% identified as lesbian and over 4% identified as bisexual. So together, almost 14% of the sample identified as a sexual minority, which is actually a very high percentage of a sample. For instance, in the general population, the last estimates point to only about 5% of the US population identifying as either lesbian, bisexual, gay, or transgendered, all combined. So having 14% in the sample is a very large sample, and it may suggest that there is a pretty sizable sexual minority community in the fire service. And important and relevant to point out, I went ahead and looked at the sample and what states these participants were from, and found out that about 47%, or half of the sample, lived in states that had statewide protections that prohibit employment discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity or sexual orientation. So first, let's talk about mental health disorders among the sample of women firefighters. So first, looking at the percentage of lifetime depressive disorder diagnosis by a health professional, almost half of women firefighters who identified as bisexual had a lifetime diagnosis of something like depression, compared to only about a quarter of lesbian and heterosexual firefighters. And when we look at lifetime anxiety disorder diagnosis, we see a very similar pattern where it's about half of bisexual firefighters and about a quarter of lesbian and heterosexuals. And finally, looking at a screener for current depressive symptoms in the past week, we see a very similar pattern where almost half of women bisexual firefighters screened for possible concern for depression, and about a quarter of lesbian and women heterosexual firefighters. So putting this into more advanced models to detect health disparities and adjusting for a multitude of things, including basic demographics, as well as the existence of statewide non-discrimination laws and workplace discrimination harassment. What I found was there was no current evidence of mental health disparities among lesbian firefighters. However, there was evidence of mental health disparities among bisexual women, and they were quite prevalent. For lifetime depressive disorder, bisexual women firefighters were almost 3 times more likely to have that diagnosis than heterosexual women firefighters. Bisexual women firefighters were 2 times more likely to score in the range of concern for current depressive symptoms. And lastly, bisexual women firefighters were 2.5 times more likely to have a lifetime anxiety disorder diagnosis. Looking at behavioral health, first I'll talk about alcohol binge drinking. We see that in the past 30 days, about over half of bisexual women firefighters and lesbian firefighters reported that they had at least one binge drinking episode, and among heterosexual firefighters, it was about 10% lower. And for cigarette use, overall, we see a very low prevalence of cigarette use among women firefighters and fire service, but we do see a slightly elevated percentage of bisexual women firefighters using cigarettes currently. Again, putting this more into advanced models to look at and estimate health disparities, there's no current evidence for a behavioral health disparity in cigarette use among bisexual women and lesbian women firefighters. However, there were behavioral health disparities in binge drinking in the past 30 days, where lesbian firefighters were 64% more likely to have reported a binge drinking episode in the past 30 days compared to heterosexual women firefighters. And for bisexual women firefighters, that was slightly higher at 73% more likely compared to heterosexual women firefighters. Lastly, the last 2 categories that I'll talk about is physical health and occupational safety disparities. And in this current data set among women firefighters, there is no current evidence for physical health or safety disparities. And in particular, what I examined was obesity and on-duty injury. So no presence of health disparities is a good thing. It means that women identify as bisexual or lesbian are experiencing similar health outcomes as women who identify as heterosexual. So what can we take from all of this preliminary data? And it's the first time that health disparities have really been ever looked at among sexual minority firefighters in the US. Well, first, there are definitely mental and behavioral health disparities among lesbian and bisexual women firefighters. And when we think about the fact that firefighters already experience higher rates of poor mental health outcomes and substance abuse, such as binge drinking, having a population like sexual minority firefighters experience even higher rates than the already elevated rates is really cause for concern and really needs to be explored more to see what's causing that and then what we can do to mitigate that. And of particular concern in all the data that I've presented so far today are the poor health outcomes for bisexual women firefighters. And this actually follows similar patterns to the general US population. And kind of the theory behind this is bisexual persons often perceive or actually experience discrimination and don't feel like they belong to either the heterosexual population or the gay and lesbian population. So there's a feeling of isolation, which can then compound into negative health disparities. So what still needs to be done? As I kind of already hinted at, we really need to discover the determinants of these mental health disparities, particularly among bisexual women firefighters. And I would suggest focusing on behavioral, sociocultural, and healthcare system determinants. And I actually have an NIH proposal to look at this that scored really well and should be funded soon. So hold tight because we are about to investigate this. As well, there needs to be an expansion into research in the fire service among sexual minorities, particularly for gay and bisexual men firefighters who, from experience in working with the fire service, seem to be more closeted than women firefighters who are sexual minorities. Future investigations should look at the intersection with race and ethnicity. So are individuals who are a racial minority and a sexual minority experiencing health disparities at a more elevated rate than those who are just a sexual minority? And lastly, there should be an examination into if there's any difference between the career and volunteer environment and the experiences of sexual minority in those places. That's the end of my presentation. Feel free to contact me. My email is below, and I look forward to any discussion you would like to have around this.